Governor Northam came down and he referenced a particular bill that was passed last year, and he specifically referenced the Senate version of the bill, which was carried by Republican Dr. Saban Donovan, and said that because in that bill it talks about complying with CDC mandates as long as it is practicable to do it, Governor Northam comes and says any school board in Virginia which does not require masks as a precondition of your child going to school can face legal consequences as a result. Right? Is that because that's a proper legal interpretation of what the bill says? No. I mean, Senator Saban Donovan certainly doesn't think it's a proper legal interpretation, but it doesn't matter because now school boards are terrified that they're going to face legal action which they can't afford if they don't comply with the governor's latest mandate. And that's what it is. It's the governor's mandate. Don't let him fool you into believing that he's just simply complying with Virginia law. That is not what's going on here. Because if we were actually following the science with respect to masks in schools, here's the debate, here's the argument we would be having. We would be sitting down and we would actually be doing cost-benefit analysis based off of scientific research. And here's what we know about COVID, that largely it's aerosol. So you can make an argument that a mask might help in limited circumstances with respect to droplets. It helps far less when we're talking about aerosol. Unless, of course, you're wearing a mask specifically designed for that purpose and regularly changing out that mask. You think that's what's going to be going on in Virginia public schools? No, kids are going to be showing up with a cloth mask, trying to learn, trying to listen to their teacher who's also speaking through a cloth mask, even though that we know that schools are not a major transmission point. Right? Show me the study where I want to see a study. I would love to see a study from the CDC, and preferably multiple studies, which demonstrates the overall efficacy of students, younger people, who are already not within the major threat category. I'm not saying that they can't be exposed to it. I'm not saying that there can't be consequences to them receiving COVID. I'm saying that as we look at the studies, as we look at the results from the whole last year, what we see is younger people are nowhere near in the same amount of threat if they don't have comorbidities as older people are. In fact, there's a whole article that we put out on 8 different things that students are more likely to be in danger of than COVID. Now, you can say, okay, all that being true, we still want to use masks as an extra precaution. Okay, great, make that argument. But the argument that's actually being made is that if you don't want your kid to wear a mask in school because you think it is detrimental to them, either socially, educationally, or maybe even health-wise, depending on what sort of symptoms they might have, well, then you're a bad person that wants people to die. Right? But that's not the reality. The reality is that there is cost-benefit analysis to wearing masks in a school environment, in an educational environment. For instance, if a student wears glasses and they're wearing a mask and every time they breathe, it fogs up their glasses, that interrupts with their learning. If they can't hear what the teacher's saying, that interrupts with their learning. If you have a teacher that has to spend most of her day explaining to a 7-year-old why they've got to keep their mask on the entire time as she's trying to educate them, that interrupts learning. And I would hope we would all agree we've had a lot of interruptions of learning over the last year. And so doing a scientific cost-benefit analysis on whether or not this is truly the best course of action would be perfectly appropriate, but no, we're just treated to do what we say or you're a bad person. Do what we say or we will punish you. And if you ask for additional information, or if you say maybe this is a decision best left up to individual teachers or parents, or at the very least best left up to school boards, no, you're a bad person that wants people to die. And the real question that school boards are having to face in Virginia right now, and I assume all over the country, this isn't just a question of whether or not you'll wear masks or not wear masks. This is a question of whether or not your child will be denied a public education if they don't wear a mask. Maybe they have some sort of other medical condition that makes them wearing a mask all day, detrimental to their health, compared to what the mask does versus what potentially being exposed to COVID does. Right? But we're not allowed to have that conversation because science. This is the part where we get a little bit skeptical. It's when people are constantly cooking the books or doing a narrative in such a way as to benefit their already predetermined policy position. That's not science. That is bias confirmation. And that's what we're seeing right now. And I have a lot of parents asking me, what's the solution to this? Well, I will tell you, definitely show up to your school board meeting. Definitely show up to your school board meeting. Let your concerns be heard. But by the same token, and I'm just going to be brutally honest here, the mask mandates in schools is actually one of the least offensive things that they're doing right now within public schools, at least within the Commonwealth of Virginia. Because the sort of ideology that they are pushing and the way that they are trying to train teachers to teach your children to look through every subject that they teach through the prism of critical race theory, I think is far more detrimental to even forcing kids to wear a mask. And so we have to ask ourselves a question right now, because the Democrats are absolutely emphatic. They want a system where they control your child's education. And they're going to do it one way or another. And the moment you have any problem with it, you're a racist, you're a bigot, you're uninformed, you're unscientific, you're an anti-vaxxer, whatever it is. And so, parents, it is time to start looking for alternatives to public education. I wish that wasn't the reality, but it is the reality. And I realize that there are some parents that cannot afford that. But for all the parents out there that think that this might be the time where they either look at things like homeschooling or learning pods or private school or other educational opportunities, many of which became far more prevalent during COVID when all the public schools were locked down, you're going to have to continue to look at it for this school year as well, unfortunately. Again, I think it's fortunately, because I do think we need more educational opportunities. And the Democrats have made it painfully clear that A, they want to control your education. And anytime they want to push your ideology and you bring it up to them that you don't like it, you're the one being political, not them. And that is something we should be frustrated about. That is something that we should be furious about. Because it's no longer about a discussion. Last podcast, we talked about a parent that got up there and talked about what was going on with critical race theory, and a school board member coming down and taking the mic away from her. Right? You will be made to care. You will be made to do what they want you to do. And what I find so fascinating about this is when you look at critical race theory, what is that really a study of? Well, it's a study of power structures. Now, they have a lot of prescriptions in there that I completely disagree with. If it was simply a theory about investigating power structures and how it might have affected people based off of race, I wouldn't have nearly the problem that I do with it right now. But that's not how it's put forward. It's put forward as if this is fact, this is reality, and your students can't avoid it, and so they must be trained to think differently. And so now your teachers must be trained to teach differently. Now, and if they don't, and if you're not willing to accept that, and you can't afford an alternative to the public school that your child is required to attend by law, if you can't afford an alternative, then you're just stuck with it. So here's my question. Within the system I've just described, who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed? Is the oppressor the person saying, I have a problem with this curriculum? Is the oppressor the person saying, I have a problem with my teachers being required to go through this training, which I think is counterproductive? Is the oppressor the parent that just says, hey, look, I want an alternative? Or maybe a parent that just says, look, before we get into all this other stuff, I would really like it if we could just ensure that my child knew how to read, write, and do math. Is that the oppressor? Or is the oppressor the politicians telling you that this is what you get, this is how your tax dollars will be spent, and if you don't like it, go somewhere else? Because I think that is a very interesting question to ask in this whole oppressor-oppressed dynamic that they keep wanting to push to all of us.